Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of INFA Managing Committee, it's a privilege for me to welcome all of you to this special webinar on animal nutrition. This is the second webinar in the series under the INFA Connect initiative, the first one being on managing relationships, which was titled as Ties Without Ties, which was a great success. Friends, we have been a little occupied for the last 1.5 months or 2 months, close to 2 months, on attending to the various challenges and issues with respect to importation, various customs and excise issues, and I am very happy to inform you that the government has been very proactively responding to our representations, and we have got a very positive feedback, and Dr. Verma and his team are driving this initiative forward. Friends, during one of the managing committee meetings, many managing committee members expressed that while we are focusing on various aspects of therapeutics, biologicals, feed additives, there is a need for us to focus on certain elements of animal nutrition, which many times does not get the desired attention. And I must thank Dr. Phalke, Dr. Verma, Mr. Pasricha, and Dr. Makhija for taking this initiative forward. In fact, we have Dr. Phalke, who is probably been discharged from the hospital today and live on this program.
My God,
He's not keeping well, but still he's quite committed to be part of this initiative. The focus of this webinar has been on two folds, and that's why we have two eminent speakers to tackle both these aspects. We have Dr. Pradeep Mahajan, who will be focusing on the role of feed additives in disease mitigation and productivity enhancement. And we have another very good speaker, Dr. Abhijit Mishra, who would focus more on feed formulation strategies. And we have two learned members as part of the team. We have Dr. Verma, who will be setting the context to begin with, and Mr. Pasricha would be talking about the way forward for animal nutrition, especially the feed additives and feed supplements, because being a chairman of the subcommittee, he has played a pivotal role in driving this segment. For human health, it is said that exercise is the king and nutrition is the queen, and put them together, you have the kingdom. While it is true for all of us, I believe the same holds true for animal nutrition and animal health, because nutrition is the only segment which is capable of bringing full recovery and can be utilized with any kind of treatment. So let's venture into this kingdom, and I will pass on to Dr. Verma to set the context and the tone for the rest of the webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Vijay Teng. Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of the Management Committee of INFA and all the members of INFA, the Indian Federation of Animal Health Companies, I welcome you all to this webinar, which is purely on feed additives and nutrition and what all the issues are. So I will not take much time on the because Vijay Saab has already told everything about what we need to drive out of this. We are focusing mainly on the export-import issues which are related to feed additives. So here I will like to share my screen. Yeah. So once again, I welcome you all to session on feed additives. Just to define it, we all know that nothing much to add in this. We all know that feed additives are the supplements which are commonly non-nutrients which accelerate growth, efficiency, and feed utilization, which are beneficial for the health, metabolism, and the texture of the feed. So this is where a lot of things are available which we add apart from the major ingredients, which are the grains and the energy and the protein sources. These are very broad and like I said that it is they use mainly for the growth promotion, disease preventing, and the and many auxiliary substances are there which are there in the feed additives, and they are added in very less quantity. So what is the scope and what is the thing I will, so these are the industry estimates that last year on an average we produced broiler feed around 12 million metric ton, the layer feed was 11 million metric ton, breeders were somewhere 2 million metric ton, shrimp and fish together were 2 million metric ton, and cattle 12 million metric ton. So this is the overall where we need these feed additives which we need to add into to make the complete feed. And this is how and the segment becomes very important. And this being important, that's why we need to have all the to be added and to make our animals and make our production, make our the entire poultry or dairy or shrimp operation profitable. We need to use different feed additives. That's how to get the maximum what we are doing it for our stakeholders. These are the things which recently now we have come across, that these are the things which are the issues in the importation of the. So because of this COVID-19 situation and because of the entire lockdown, everything happened. There's a delay in getting the original documents. To clear the goods, there was a delay in original documents. If at all it has reached also, there were nobody to work upon it. There were nobody to see that what is actually happening. So that resulted into huge demurrages and detention charges ranging from 1 lakh to 3.5 lakh. These are some numbers which can vary. Even if everything is there, if the papers are there, then there is a delay in the clearance from the authorities. There is a classification issue. You all know that most of our feed additives are in chapter 23. But they classify it into 29 or 30, making it more complicated, making it more attractive, more duty tax to that. So that ultimately was pushing all our members to clear the goods immediately by giving the bank guarantees or something else. So like that. And if everything is done, then there is a product analysis delay. Sometimes it is marked to the ADC, sometimes to the animal quarantine officer. So these are the things which are making it more complicated. So I will keep these issues and then we will take it forward. We will listen to our eminent speakers, Dr. Mahajan and Dr. Mishra. And with this, I hand over it to Dr. Mahajan to give his deliberation. And after that, Mr. Pasricha, and we will take it, the issues and the way forward. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Verma. And if you give me a minute, I'll start sharing my screen. Hope it is okay.
Yes.
And with your permission, I'll stop my video. So let me first thank INFA for inviting me for this talk. It is great to be interacting. And as Mr. Teng and Mr. Verma mentioned, I'll be speaking on role of nutrition in general and feed additives in specific in maintaining health and productivity of animals. So now I would have very much liked to start my discussion or topic with presenting the exact similar slide on usage of feed additives. Like we saw in Mr. Verma's presentation, he mentioned the feed volumes, annual feed volumes for our country. Unfortunately, as of now, we don't have a very reliable source of the quantity or value of feed additives being used by our industry. And this is true even all over the world. So I will take this opportunity and request INFA to at least work in this direction so that everybody is aware about how much feed additives are we using today. Now, given my understanding of the industry, my experience, and as a nutritionist, over last 25, 30 years, our usage of feed additive has been continuously rising. If you look at formulations of broiler, layer, or dairy cattle diet in the 80s, there were hardly any additives, which started to change in early 90s. Early 90s, feed additives became very important. And then onward, continuously, their share of the total feed cost has been going up. If I remember correctly, my use of additives in the late 80s, early 90s, if I just listed in one particular diet, the list would be kind of 5, 6. Today, if you look at a good poultry, good broiler diet, the list of feed additives, their number runs easily from anywhere from 10, 15 up to 20 different things. It is not only the number which is going up, but the cost of these additives, the total volume of these additives we are using is continuously rising. And though we don't have accurate figures, now we can certainly discuss the factors which affect usage of feed additives. First and foremost is our knowledge of nutrition, but that has to be supported by knowledge of physiology, biochemistry, chemistry, especially the synthetic chemistry, genetics of animals we are using for production and their performance. Also the newer sciences like the epigenetics, nutrigenomics, and biotechnology. All these have contributed to our understanding of animal performance, role of nutrition, and also the role of feed additive, their importance, and what we can achieve with usage of these feed additives. But most of all, the economics and affordability is a very big factor in our decision of how much to use which feed additive and why. Now, though we cannot cover all those factors which affect our usage of feed additive today, I will run through quite quickly the factors I have listed here, starting from the knowledge of chemistry and basic nutrition. Our understanding of the basic chemistry, organic chemistry, the role of different additives, for example, vitamins, how they are important, and also our ability to synthesize them so that they can be utilized in feed cheaply and economically. Now, the genetics, on the other hand, has been improving our animals continuously. In the early 20th century, the two world wars stimulated production and production parameters of all animals maintained for products for human use. Broilers were no exception. And around Second World War, geneticists started improving the available breeds. And you can see how the number of days to market came down, whereas the body weight of broilers continuously improved over the last century and is continuing even today. Now, similarly, if we look at the dairy cows, milk production has been improved by very intensive selection in the beginning, and now with application of knowledge of genetics. The cows of 1950s, it was common, and I'm talking of better cows, common to have 4,000 liters per lactation, which is now crossing 10,000 liters per lactation. Even in India, we have a significant number now, which easily gives us 9,000 liters per lactation. Now, all this progress in genetics has to be supported by animal nutrition, and nutrition knowledge also historically, starting from Lavoisier and his experimentation in oxygen, how live animals use oxygen in their respiration and in generating heat, increased our understanding continuously. And therefore, now we can very confidently say there is a big impact of overall nutrition on health. As Mr. Vijay Teng gave a very good analogy of exercise and nutrition being the king and queen, I challenge him for his next talk to fit genetics in that analogy somewhere. But the age-old debate of nature versus nurture, genetics versus upbringing or environment, what affects more? Scientists were obsessed with studying twins. And here is one such example where these two brothers, Otto and Ewald, were monozygotic twins, meaning their genetics was exactly same. But they chose different physical exercise regimen and different diets. And when they were 23 years old, you can see the difference in their physique. Now remember, the genetics is same. But unfortunately, such studies were restricted earlier to only the twins. In human, there was a very big and very tragic event around the end of World War II. Starting from November 1944 till May 1945, there was something called Dutch winter hunger. You can look up, Google it. You will find lots and lots of information of what happened. I will just mention that the Allied forces tried to liberate Holland, the Netherlands. Their attempt failed. The operation to liberate failed around November, and the Nazis, because of this aggression, also compounded with the fact that there was a rail strike during that time and very heavy winter set in. The Nazis started rationing food available to all the Dutch people, and very quickly their calorie intake came down below 1,000. Remember, a normal adult needs 1,800 kilocalories of energy every day. Whereas the whole population in Western Holland that time, the intake was ranging between 400 to 800 kilocalories. You can imagine what kind of starvation and what kind of effect it would have had on health. But because of the very good records kept by the government and hospitals, scientists started using the information about what happened during that period, and especially the mothers who were pregnant around that time or conceived during that time, and during the next 70 years, what was the effect of mother's nutrition on the newborn child. And science now knows that even after 40, 70 years, whatever the mother ate during her pregnancy affects the outcome, the disease, and the course of life. For example, if you compare brothers who were born out of conception during that period versus who were born afterwards, those who were born in that period have very severe conditions of diabetics and obesity. Now, this gave rise to a generation of a new science called epigenetics. And from those studies, the scientists quickly carried out experiments in lab and confirmed what was found in the human population in Netherlands. These picture shows you two rats genetically identical, but one's mother got good plane of nutrition when she was pregnant and the other did not. She received very poor nutrition, and the yellow rat on your left was the one whose mother got poor nutrition. So look at the obesity in later life. Now, does this apply to our farm animals? I will give you one or two examples to drive my point home. One such very commonly used observation is the body condition score of a dry cow. If we have a dry cow during the dry period of 2 months, around 60, 70 days of dry period, how we feed her affects a lot of afterwards during the lactation, how she will perform. And there are a number of studies showing the effect of body condition score during dry period on the outcome of lactation. Recently, there has been a lot of attention to ketosis after parturition. And this is one study which proved the effect of high body score, like the fatty cows, if you take, their insulin level post-calving and their sensitivity to that insulin level gets negatively impacted if the cow is obese during dry period. So put on more body condition and you later run into trouble with ketosis. And obviously then during dry period feeding, how do you feed the animals? What kind of diet you give, whether you give enough attention to DCAD will all decide the outcome afterwards. DCAD, I just mentioned, that is dietary cation-anion difference or dietary cation-anion balance during dry period also affects the blood calcium levels of the cows after calving. And we all know how much important milk fever is, or the hypocalcemia. This can be prevented with feeding a negative DCAD ration during the dry period. And to arrive at that kind of ration, you have to use different mineral sources, different anionic salts as feed additives, so that you ensure later that the cow not only gives us good quantity of milk, but does not run into problem because of extra calcium excretion. Let us see an example in broilers. Now we all know about tibial dyschondroplasia, the different nutrients which affect the condition, especially electrolytes, calcium phosphorus ratio, vitamin D3 and its metabolite. These help in controlling or improving the tibial dyschondroplasia, but there are some other substances like toxins and especially fusarium toxins, then the carbamate fungicides, which can contribute to dyschondroplasia. So surely the whatever we are feeding to animals affects their health outcome. And if we just take hypocalcemia for example, which is a very common in high yielding dairy cows, and we divide the calcium functions into two. The smooth muscle contraction, we know calcium is required, and it is also required for immunity. Just this smooth muscle contraction function, because of lower calcium availability, can give rise to problems with uterine motility, which can either cause dystocia or retained placenta, which will lead to metritis and cause problems with uterine involution, which will then give rise to problems with reproduction. Similarly, the same smooth muscle function can interfere with rumen motility. Rumen fail, the energy balance, milk yield will drop, and this has a role, every of this thing has a role to play in ketosis, fatty livers, and problems in reproduction. So just taking care of the calcium nutrition, and that we can use different ingredients for supplying calcium, but we can also use substances like vitamin D3 for better absorption, other feed additives to help us overcome all this and achieve a good calcium status. Now, I'm acutely aware about the short time we have. Now, I won't run through each and everything of this, but we all know today the vast choice we have among feed additives, and just as a group, I have listed different groups of additives. In each group, you can list down different feed additives. And to me, today, each one of them is becoming extremely important in ensuring animals' productivity. But not only productivity, the health of animal. So I'll stop here and will now like to hand it over to my friend, Dr. Abhijit Mishra. Abhijit, please take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mahajan. Thank you, INFA, for such a wonderful webinar. And also the participants, a very good evening. Dr. Mahajan, can you please stop sharing your presentations?
I think you can try. I have stopped sharing already. Start sharing yours.
Yeah, but it's only yours only.
Okay, I'll share once again and stop again. Stopped again. Can you?
No, it's showing only your name is coming in the screen.
Yeah, so share your screen now.
There is a green button in the bottom, doctor. Green button. Yeah. Now it is coming.
Yeah.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Thank you, Anfa, for this wonderful webinar. The role of strategies, today's is the topics is of feed formulation strategies. If you look into the strategies, there is a number of variables, and the most important thing is that the identification and the resolutions of those variables are the most important phenomena in animal nutrition. And there are two kinds of variables are there. One is the visible variables, another are the virtual variables. And what are the visible and virtual that I will come subsequently in my next presentation. So before going to any feed formulations or for a nutritionist, there are certain points which has to be considered in a very careful manner. The raw materials quality, which plays a major role in the maintaining the feed quality. Second is the prevention of variability of raw materials, which is also very important nowadays because there are a lot of variations in the quality of the raw materials. Say, for example, if you have a maize, the energy level may vary from, as per my observations, it's 2980 to 3450. So there is a huge variation of metabolic energy in the maize. Even in soybean also, the same kind of variations is there. If you have a normal soybean, the protein content, it varies from 43 to 47%. So these variations has to be taken care of while you are doing any strategies for nutrition or for strategies for any animals. Next is the most important part, what we are talking in this today's webinar, that is the additives. I generally prefer to categorize these additives into three segments. One is of nutritional additives, which means the additives which is having some virtual contributions, or those are directly related to the to the productions or performance like that. Some are the supportive additives which may be required or may not be. Even in some instances, maybe even there are some additives which may be required or may not, occasionally important. And there are some additives which are ornamental additives, I should say. That this means if we get the specific, this is a very specific, and when we need some medicated diet or we need some special diet for any regions or for any particular any areas, then we have to add those kind of additives. To elaborate a little more in these segments, nutritional additives like vitamins, minerals, enzymes, and supportive additives, you can say it's in toxin binders or gut health products, and ornamental say electrolytes, it is depend only in the summer season. Your immunostimulants, there are some products. So those things are has to be decided that which region, what are the objectives, and also at the same time we have to look into the nutritional requirement of the particular breed or particular birds, whether it's a breeder, broiler, or it's a layer, and what kind of breeds is there, and also the performance goals, what kind of performance we are looking for. The most important performance of goal, why I have kept this point, is like that. Today's where the integration models are almost everywhere in India, in most of the cases it's an integration model, and certain areas the people are very comfortable with okay, FCR, somebody says no, I need body weight. But the most important thing is that you have to calculate the cost per kg body weight, which is the most important economic parameter has to be looked into. Whether you are having a very high res and high dense diet, and you are getting X FCR in a little lower dense diet, but you are getting Y dense. But if the Y group has given the least cost per kg body weight, per kg meat yield, then that would has to be taken into consideration in the base feed. So in these segments, I will go a little bit about the nutritional additives and the others. So the first category is it comes under the minerals. There is a long debate which one is the base, the organic or the inorganic. To me, it's my personal experience or my personal opinion. that organic minerals are much better than inorganic, because if you look into the right side, this is the Mulder's chart. There are everyone knows that in an inorganic minerals there are a lot of mineral interactions are there. There are and the availability or the absorptions of the inorganic minerals is very poor. In contrast to that, the availability of organic minerals, that is much higher than inorganic one. And the recent studies, what it cites, that is the nutrigenomics, what we found, that if in case of the organic minerals, the upregulations of genes, the organic minerals has a major role in the upregulations of the genes. There are three kinds of genes response. One is the upregulations, one is downregulations, and another one is called the differential regulations. So the organic minerals, what it does, it enhances the upregulation of the genes, so that we get the better performance in all the respects. And also, I have a doubt about the NRC recommendations on inorganic ones, and least but not the least, you have to create your own standard for whether it's an organic or other additives, because you have to look into your areas. You have to go by your R&D data, and you have to set your performance goals and all those things. So in the mineral chapters, I would like to highlight the only one minerals, though other minerals are equally important. All minerals are equally important. But why I emphasize on the zinc? Because this is the only mineral which is having contribution or the part of all 6 classes of enzymes. That means there are 6 classes of activities are there in the body. That is oxidoreductase. The example is of superoxide dismutase, and zinc is a component of that. Transferase, that is DNA polymerase example, and zinc is a component. Hydrolase, lyase, ligase. So all 6 categories of enzymes are zinc dependent. So that's the reason why I like to have a more importance of zinc on that side. Even not only that, the zinc plays a major role in bacteria, fungi, parasite, and also in the virus prevention. Yes, all of we know, everyone, that due to this corona, and the major part what the doctors are suggesting to take the suggesting to the patients, that is a zinc as a supplement. So this is due to its multifunctional activities. Also, the one most neglected part is the antioxidant properties of the skin antioxidant properties. It has been studied and observed that this zinc has a great role in the skin oxidations. Along with it, increase the immunity. It also prevents cellulitis. Even zinc and selenium, both together, it also have a great antioxidant properties in the spermatozoa. So it has a major role in male fertility. And there are antagonisms. It's well-known antagonisms is there. Definitely, you have it has antagonism with vitamins B1, B2, B12. It has antagonism with different minerals, copper, iron, selenium, in different mechanisms, and also in the heavy metals. So if it is having a deficiency, then definitely there will be a atrophy of thymus, so that the immunosuppression was there, and ultimately the birds will succumb to the diseases. And it also decreases activities of the pathogen. So if any macrophages, so if any antigen comes into the body, then the first defensive mechanism, they can't enter into this, and they can't prevent on that. Even zinc is another one important parameters that zinc is having. If you have excess of zinc, that is at a level of 10,000 to 20,000 ppm in the diet, so it has been well established that if you had that kind of much of 10,000 to 20,000 ppm of zinc, that then the molting can be possible with these zincs, because it prevents the calcium absorptions, and then it prevent the enzymatic activities, particularly the LH hormones releases, and so the molting the production will be stopped, and the birds will come to them in molting situations. Now, what are the requirements of the minerals? How much minerals is required in the diet? So there is a standard curve. There, somebody says no, we do not have any mineral deficiency. Yes, you may not have the mineral deficiency, because there are three levels. There is optimum level, suboptimal level, and the clinical level. If you have an optimum level, we will definitely get the optimum performance on it. But if you have a subclinical level, which the NRC recommendations falls in between these subclinical levels, then definitely you will have a decreased immunity. You will have you will not get the optimum production, and also the you will have some some areas of lameness and so on. But if you when there is a severe deficiency, that is called a clinical deficiency, then only you can see the deficiency of minerals. In the right hand side, if you increase the levels of minerals, then definitely everything will come into the normalized positions. So that means that you have to select the standard. What is the actual requirement of a bird? Yes, it's really very difficult to go for that. Which one per day recommendations, but definitely you can judge that what is in which level we are getting the optimum level of performance. So that will give us the indications, because we will get the optimum performance from using these minerals. So to me, I have just pointed out here the NRC 1994 versus the organic recommendations, what I generally follow, and getting the almost optimum performance. That is in case of the zinc. If you look into this in an inorganic form, that is in 40 if it is in 40 mg, then in organic form definitely you to have 30 to 35 mg. In case of the copper, an NRC is recommended and it's an 8 mg, but in my recommendations it should be for 4 to 6 mg. In case of iodine, it's in 0.35 in inorganic versus 3 in organic. That's very high. In case of selenium, it's in 0.15, but nowadays we are following 0.3 to 0.45. The reason here I just explain, because the organic zinc and organic selenium, it has been studied, and it was noticed that it can prevent the multiplication of RNA viruses. So organic zinc and organic selenium levels has to be maintained carefully in the diet, so that it can give the production benefits as well as the oxidative benefits, as well along with the immunostimulations and the viral multiplication, prevention of multiplication. So in case of the chromium, in inorganic, it is not at all there, because 1994, at that time, it was not at all established that chromium is required for the diet. But in the case of the organic, it is 0.3 to 0.5 mg is absolutely required, because it has a major role in glucose transformations, and particularly in some disease conditions like ND, Rani-Kedri disease, or the Newcastle disease. At that time, the glucose utilizations get prevented and birds get emaciated, and the mortality happens. Even after, even in the protected farms also, there might have some vaccine failure birds, and those birds get easily affected and the mortality goes up. Yes, we can't prevent those mortalities, but yes, we can reduce the mortality by using the organic chromium or even in the liquid chromium form. In manganese, yes, it's in 60 in an NRC recommendations, and in organic, I should recommend it's in 30 to 35. Iron, it's in earlier days, it was 80 milligram, but nowadays, whether the iron is absolutely required or not, that is questionable. But generally, that's the reason I have kept it in 0 to 30 inch, because there are all the raw materials that we are using in poultry diets, and corn, or whether it's in corn, or whether it's in soybean, or it's in corn DDGS, or in maize gluten. Everywhere the iron concentration is very high. So we have to be very careful about whether it's absolutely required or not. And next, it's in vitamin A. There are a lot of weakness, and the SANG, it has a role to maintain the SANG color and ruffled feathers, and there are a lot of there. There is also antagonism and also the synergistic effects on vitamin A, but mostly the synergistic activity. Vitamin A has the synergistic activity with vitamin E, selenium, copper, vitamin D, as well as they have the antagonistic with those as well. Even they have an antagonistic activity with iron, vitamin D3 and C. Now, vitamin D3, I just want to highlight, it's again in vitamin D3 level, because you know, in a human being also, it has been published that those who is having higher vitamin D3 level, they have least affected by coronavirus. So even in other diseases as well. And the same thing can be applied in poultry industry as well. because vitamin D3 is very much required, and the proper concentration of vitamin D3 is really very much important, because it gets vitamin D3, whether it's from the sunlight or it's from the diet, it's an egg or a fish or whatever it may be. It comes to the river, then it converted into 25 hydroxycholecalciferol, then it's go to the kidney, and 125 dihydroxycholecalciferol, which is the active form, and it is a major role in formations of the calcium absorptions and the formations of the bone. So without proper vitamin D3, you may not get the absolute bone or the bone strength. Otherwise, you may have the fragile bone, you may have rickets and all those things. Even in some cases, in vitamin D3 plays a major role in the formations of the muscles. And if there is a deficiency of vitamin D, so I just quickly go through that. There is a huge cardiovascular disease probabilities are there. It increases the parathyroid hormone, increases the RASS levels, and it decreases the interleukin 10, increases, so that what will happen, the cardiac hypertrophy happens, and which is the major cause for progressive heart failure and the cardiac fibrosis. So to prevent this, we must have to add a proper concentration of vitamin D3 level. Vitamin E in our early life of our starting of my career, when I have started, we saw a lot of vitamin E deficiency cases. Yes, today's scenarios also we may found it very little, but there are the deficiency diseases which cause the encephalomalacia, muscular atrophy, and one common practice is what I would like to say. In some cases, when we visit the farms, we found that there are one or two birds or chicks, particularly in the chicks, they are walking in the back. So this is very common phenomena of vitamin E deficiency, encephalomalacia. That's the reason that they are walking. They are only because the head becomes very heavy, so they can't. Their head becomes the downward, and they can't see in the forward, and so they only can see the backward portions. So they thought that they have to go to the back, that side directions only. Vitamin K, which is also very required for the clottings, and even role has osteoporosis. Next is the B complex. B complex has a multifunctional activities, because B complex plays a major role not only as in vitamins, but also it plays a role for the carbohydrate, protein, and fat metabolism. If you look into the vitamin B2, B6, B12, biotin, and pantothenic acid, they have a major role in protein synthesis. In contra, the B1, B2 niacin and pantothenic again also having the effect of the carbohydrate metabolism, and B2 niacin and pantothenic acid, they have a role to synthesis of the fats. So if you look these, so proper concentrations of vitamin B complex has to be there in the feed. We should not compromise anything, because what we found that there are interactions in the vitamin B vitamins, mostly even dependency is also there. So in some cases, what happens if you have two dependent vitamins, then each they can manage themselves, but optimum performance cannot be achieved until or unless we provide the optimum level of vitamins. The same story applies in vitamins also. What I told in mineral cases. There are four levels. One is the deficiency. One is the when we will find the absolute clinical signs of vitamin deficiency, which is very rare today's nutrition or today's in the pathological situations. Even in some cases, when if you have a high mycotoxin level in the feed, or you have poor gut health where the absorption is very less, in that case we may found some deficiency. Otherwise, in generally we found the marginal level of vitamins in the diet that could prevent the only the deficiency, but that cannot take the birds to or take you to go to reach your optimum goal. So you have to give the optimum level of vitamins. In some cases, there might have some excess vitamins as well, because I know one of my clients, he is having that one. I recommended to give a 500 some on my vitamin composition. So the 500 goes, and my mistake they given in 1,000 1 kg. So they have some problem on that, but there are some cushions are there. So we have to give the optimum levels. And in my diet, I will prefer to have this kind level of vitamins in a broiler diet, in a broiler starter diet, I could have prefer if it is having a level vitamin A level of 12,500 to 15,000 IU per kg diet. And vitamin D3, I definitely prefer to have more than 4,000 IU. Generally, it comes 2,500 or 3,000, but I prefer to go for 4,000 because what I told to get the optimum performance, even and some of my clients who are getting it's an for 38 days, it's in 2. You can say average it's in 2.4 kg with an FCR of 1.4 or 1.41. It's an average, yearly average. So for that, you have to give this much level of vitamins, A, D3. Vitamin E, I kept it in 50 to 80, but yes, the requirement you may go up to 150 mg because it has vitamin E has a role in antioxidant properties. It has immunostimulation roles. So it can be the level can be up to 150 mg. Vitamin K3, it's in 3 and 4 is absolutely fine. Vitamin B1 is also it's most important because you have to look into that, because if you have a very high level of vitamin B1, you may have a problem of coccidiosis. So in that case, you have to be very careful about that. Vitamin B2, it's in 7 to 9. Vitamin B6, it's in 4 to 6. I just read it out. Vitamin B12, it's in microgram. It's in 20 to 24. B3 or niacin, it should be 50 to 60. B5, 15 to 70. Beta folic acid 2 to 3, and beta biotin it should be 150 to 200. And those vitamins are very much required. In case of layer, the recommendations it get a little bit lesser, but the folic and biotin levels remains almost the same, because in some cases it may not be applicable in India, but in outside India, either in the Bangladesh or Myanmar, where I am working as well. They maintain the standard body weight. So the fatty liver hemorrhagic syndrome is very common for them. So you have to be very careful about those things. Vitamin plays a major role in immunity, what I told earlier as well. So the vitamins which are the most important vitamins that plays a major role in immunity, these are the vitamin A, E, D3, C, folic acid, and vitamin B12. Even in case of, I know that in India, particularly the northern part of India, and even in some eastern part of India, where the swine production is gaining high importance. In that case, in case of the swine, the vitamin B12 level is very, very important. So we have to be very careful about the breed specific requirements, what breeds we are having and whom we are feeding, and what are the specific requirements for them. I'm sorry. In case of the amino acids, plays a major role also in immunity. That is the tryptophan, arginine, histidine, cysteine, leucine, isoleucine, valine, and glutamate. Those amino acids are very important. Generally, when we make the formulations, histidine and glutamate, they generally come automatically, but the rest of the parts we have to maintain, and we have to balance. I told earlier that vitamin E and selenium, they play a major role in antioxidations or the free radical prevention formations. So if you look into the normal cell, it is having a cytoplasma inside, and the blue layers, the free radicals are there, and also they are trying to attack us the cytoplasm. And vitamin E, if you have vitamin E with selenium, they are trying to prevent this. But if it is not there in a deficient diet, then what will happen? Automatically the cell membrane, the free radicals will enter inside, and the cell will rupture, and there will be the free radicals will come, and the cytoplasm will be destroyed. So we have to maintain the proper vitamin E and selenium levels. It's selenium. There are two forms of selenium is available. One is the natural form, that is selenomethionine or selenocysteine. Another one is the inorganic form. But I will prefer to have a organic form that gives them much better role. Apart from those two things, I'll come the nutritional additives, that is the enzymes, which plays a major role and to contribute the virtual energy. But the major issues is that the variation in quality, because there are a lot of we are sitting with the additives companies, so there are a lot of variations in the qualities of the And the most disadvantage of this, there is no specific international unit except the phytase. Only phytase is having one international unit, but other enzymes do not have. Every companies, they are having their own standards and own enzymes units. So while selecting enzymes, we have to go through thoroughly the technical details of that particular companies. We can't compare company A or company B, the units of company A and company B, because some companies may have the 30,000 units, which is giving maybe a dose rate of 100 grams may give the good excellent response, whereas the others which may have the inclusions of 200 or 300, that may even though they are having maybe 10 lakhs or 15 lakhs units. So we have to be very careful. We can't select that, yes, the company A is having 30,000, so we are having 12 lakhs, so ours is better. That cannot be possible to say. We have to go through the scientific trials reports and what are the company recommendations with facts and figures. Because even we have to be very careful about selecting the products as well, because the enzymes are very much substrate specific. So you have to look into the diet, what kind of enzymes do we have and what we require. Yes, I would prefer to, if in my opinion, I will prefer to have a phytase in my diet, the first enzymes to be. And if you ask me the second enzymes in NSP categories, the first enzyme of NSP categories, that should have the xylanase. There are ample data and the studies on raw materials which shows the arabinoxylan content is always in the higher side in case of the enzymes, in case of the raw materials. And so definitely we have to be very careful about the selecting the virtual energy, because the virtual energy level, there are a lot of claims here, starting from 50 kilocal to an extent of almost 170. What I have got the informations, but we have to be very careful whether the diet what we are preparing, that is capable to give that much of energy or 170 kilocal energy or not. So you have to be based on your scientific trials and also specifications. But I told in my seconds ago that my first enzyme what I will prefer, that should be of phytase, because phytase it remains as a form of phytic acid in the diet, in the plants and in the diet, and it is an anti-nutritional factor. So if we are not able to destroy this phytic acid, if we are not able to break these diet phytic acids, then that will act as an anti-nutritional factors and the digestion will be hampered. So we have to use proper phytase to dissolve these phytic acids and to get the nutrients out of it. Yes, phytase can contribute. There are a lot of studies and are there. This phytase can contribute the calcium, phosphorus, and sodium. Along with that, it can contribute some NSPs and also the other amino acids. But you have to be very careful about the selecting the matrix value of it, because again the matrix value varies from 0.1 to 0.22. So a choice of yours is, and with the technicalities, is what should be the matrix value for my formulations. So and there's a list of enzymes and the substrates along with the targeted raw materials, that is everyone knows, and it's very, very common slide. So this is I should skip because time is I think it's only 1 minute left. And next is a very important, the recent concept. I should say it's not a recent concept. It's an old concept, but it has been packed in a new bottle. Old wine in packed in a new bottle. Because creatine is very from the ancient time. It was there. It is there, and it will be there. But it was the neglected part in our countries. The actions, its benefits that has not been squeezed up. So now, if you look into the creatinine, approximately 2% of the body's creatine is converted to creatinine. Body muscles, it contains the creatine, and it converted to creatinine, and it goes to the bloodstream. Then it goes out through the kidneys. And this is the fact for the animals, for even in the human beings. And to form this creatinine, we have to use the two most important, that is the arginine and the glycine. This plays a major role. So arginine and glycine, it goes to the kidney, and then the formations of guanidino acetic acid. Guanidino acetic acid, it converted to creatine and goes to the blood, and then it goes to the muscles. Now, these in the muscles, the creatinine, it stays in the forms of phosphocreatinine. Phosphocreatinine and creatinine, these two are the major source of energies. So they store the energy in the muscles, and every day, almost what I told, the 2% of these converted to the creatinine and goes out. This phosphocreatinine, with the help of the creatine kinase enzymes, it converted to creatine, and then creatinine, and it goes back to the kidney and it goes out. During this process of phosphocreatinine to creatine conversion, there is a conversion of ADP to ATP. It's adenosine diphosphate to adenosine triphosphate. And as we know, the 1 mole of ATP, this gives an energy of 7.3 kilocal. And you can see these kind of procedures in the conversion, you may get up to 7 moles of ATP. That means it may contribute huge energy. So we have to be very careful whether we are getting it or not, how much virtual energies we are getting from other sources in the phytase and the NSPase enzymes, and also in the protease enzymes and other what are the total virtual energies we are taking care of. So we have to be very careful, but this is an area we can think of that this plays a role that can be a contributing factor or can be a factor for economic feed production. Now, it's a general during the formulations, we have to keep in mind the nutritional requirements, because it widely varies. If we look into the breeds, all breeds are having their own standards, and the most important thing is that whether those standards are optimum or not, that is a questionable, because which one is the optimum standard, that you have to decide yourselves by way of trial and error methods in your organizations or in your areas. The breeder standards, they are only, you can say it's a reference book for us. You can take it as a reference, but you have to follow your standards, what you want to do. You have to provide adequate energy levels. Yes, energy have recent studies, what is found that energy level, birds feed for amino acid, not for energy. But yes, it is also true, if you have an energy deficient diet, definitely bird will try to fulfill their energy level first, then they will go for the amino acid levels. And next is the energy to lysine ratio, which is a measure. There's no standards for that, but you have to do that. There are some publications which shows the MEME to lysine ratios for broilers and layers, even in the slow growing birds. Energy, and also there are a lot of variations in the lysine to amino acid ratio till valine, because what I told this till valine, because you have to maintain the lysine is to methionine plus cysteine, threonine, tryptophan, arginine, isoleucine, leucine, valine, even some cases serine and glycines as well. So you have to be you have to maintain everything. Yeah, I think I have to be very first, and breeder specific amino acids, incremental amino acids is very important, and also the metal quality variations. Now, gut health maintenance and the other areas, we have to look into the gut health, which is a major part. Gut health maintenance is a major challenge for non-antibiotic area. Yes, we are able to use some antibiotics in India, but the trend has different, it's changing. Now the multi-dimensional approach, you have to take the multi-dimensional approach. That means you have to have a different kind of products which have a different mode of actions, but that can perform in a better way. Like we have probiotics, we have prebiotics, phytobiotics, acidifier, short chain fatty acids, or the medium chain fatty acids. So you have to use those products judicially to maintain the proper gut health, because when the birds, in the hatcheries, the birds is having, say for example, birds is having very high level of lactobacillus when they are hatched in the hatchery. But when they comes to the farm, this lactobacillus, the levels goes down, and the pathogenic bacteria they take the upper hand. So we have to be very careful about the specific products, and we have a specific group of products, and to take care of those kind of things. Next is the concept of bacteriophages. This is not at all a new concept, but it is in 1950 it was first identified that bacteriophages is role in a very specific manner. But still today I have some doubt how much it is effective in through feed applications. Yes, it is very, very much effective if you can go for water applications, and so we have to look into that. Coccidia prevention is another strategy we have to take care of. Yep, and emulsifier also plays a major role, because emulsifier plays a major role because okay, I will finish. And this is the last take home messages. There is no single magic bullet for us. The strategy should be based on objective and goal. Don't go by the flow, rather go by the science. I always believe to go by the science only. So if we can go by the science, definitely we can achieve our target. Select products having strong technical data bank. We have to go, definitely we have to do that. Judge the product at local level. Maintain protocol, local level, judge yourself, and you select the product. Scientific considerations of virtual nutrient contribution has to be taken care of very carefully, that I have already told. This is phytase, NSPs, enzymes, protease, emulsifier, whatever you are taking, you have to be very careful on that. And mycotoxins are the hidden enemies. We have to take the attention on that. And last but not least, the immunity, which is the wall of defense. We have to maintain the body immunity to get the optimum performance. And I believe this is the last slide from my end. I don't know, I stopped. So thank you very much. Thank you for time. I'll stop my sharing and I'll hand over it to Pasrija sir.
Yes. Good evening, all participants. I think the importance of nutrition has been highlighted in very appropriate way. Thanks to Vijay Teng for the invocation. Thanks to very useful insights provided by nutrition experts, Dr. Mahajan and Dr. Mishra, and the industry expert, Dr. Verma. Let's now find the way forward and recommit ourselves for the same. There seems to be a problem in moving forward. Yes. We all understand that the feed supplements play most important role in productivity enhancement and profitable farming. But still, the deserving importance has not been given to the same by regulators as well as consumers themselves. If we look at the problems which we face for feed supplements and feed additives, they all revolve around these four issues. Lack of understanding in categorization, thin line of demarcation between drugs and the feed supplements, lack of appropriate regulatory framework, and lack of coordination among different government institutions. These are the problems which we are facing day in and day out. Now, INFA has been constantly working in a very methodical and proactive way, addressing the root cause, not the symptoms, compiling information, sharing information, making representations, and creating consensus among all stakeholders, like representation made to Ministry of Agriculture, GST Council. That was a big win, that our feed supplements are GST exempted. Learning and sharing. There has been a joint seminar of feed supplement subcommittee and import export subcommittee in order to bring clarity in understanding as well as the solutions within the member companies. And the most important of all efforts involved is the creation of white paper on feed supplements. Our real solution and the giant step forward is the white paper on feed supplements. Let's look at what it brings. It will bring consistency in understanding of feed supplements, clear categorization based on existing laws and practices. We are reinforcing existing law and practices to avoid any individual interpretation. Assigning definite identity to feed supplements. You can have the glimpse of the white paper, what it will look like, but we can go into much deeper details in a separate forum. It will have the opinion of the experts as well as the industry. And it will address most of the issues, regulatory framework, what we suggest, and how do we go forward. I think, yeah, we cut back. Now, the white paper is almost ready for launch. We'll be sharing with the members. And we all understand that understanding the evolving landscape of animal nutrition, we all at INFA are consistently moving in the direction in fulfilling the nutritional needs. That is a one angle, but bringing the uniformity in understanding the usefulness as well as identity of feed supplements among all stakeholders. We are moving towards our destination with consistency and persistence. And I think we all have the responsibility to make white paper as the mother document for all referrals and the decisions within the industry and outside the industry. Thank you very much. And that is all about all of us, the speakers. Now is the time for all the persons who are participants. They might have some questions, queries regarding or pertaining to usefulness, problems, or the way forward. I'll request Dr. Vijay Makhija to address these questions from the participants.
Thank you, Satish Prasija ji, and thank you all the speakers for sparing their valuable time in preparing the presentation and delivery of those presentations. So I will request Dr. Pradeep Mahajan, Dr. Abhijit Mishra, and all the other speakers to keep your microphone on unmute. I will be starting the first question with Dr. Mahajan. Quite a number of questions have come, so we'll try to see how much justice we can do. The first question to you, Dr. Mahajan, is your comment on use of proteolytic enzyme for the ruminant feed. Your thoughts, please.
Why only proteolytic enzymes? All enzymes in ruminants, every nutritionist like me first looks at it with a lot of questions. Number one, when a cow has been bestowed with an enzyme factory of her own, such a huge rumen, where the additional enzymes are going to help. And the two next important factors are, will the enzymes themselves be stable in rumen? Will they be active in rumen? Will they not be destroyed by bacteria, big protein in nature themselves, most of them at least? That apart, we also expect, unlike other species, unlike the simple stomach animals, we also expect some enzymes to have negative consequences in rumen. For example, amylase, and I'll come to protease later. If I have a good, very well fast-acting amylase, I might end up digesting, fermenting starch too fast in rumen, leading to acidosis. Similarly, in case of protein, we want to have different rates of fermentation of feed protein so that we get a steady ammonia level in rumen. We include NPNs, non-protein nitrogen, like urea compounds, where conversion of this compound to ammonia is very quick. In 1 to 2 hours, all the urea present is gone as ammonia. If you add to this a proteolytic enzyme, which it can quicken the rate of ammonia formation in rumen and can even lead to toxicity. So this is the other side where you have to be cautious. But that said, I'm not denying the role. The enzymes, I think, will need much more data and much more precision in their action. Also, the rate at which they act in rumen to help the cow in a positive manner. Otherwise, it can very quickly transform into a problem. So yes, there, and let me go back to amylase. We talk a lot about corn, maize. In India, nearly 100%, at least more than 90% of our maize is sun-dried. And it is dried to less than 12%, even less than 10% moisture. Because of our climate, we need that. But that gives a very hard structure to the grain. Also, we know the varieties we're using, the structure of starch present is very tough to digest. Go to any good dairy farm, speak to him for 5 minutes on maize in feed, and I'm sure in 99% of the cases he has encountered maize coming out in dung. That gives us something to know about the characteristics of maize we are using. So is there a opportunity to have some kind of amylase which will help us there? Yes, definitely. Yeah. Will there be a problem with some kind of amylase which is acting too fast, or if I end up using more and slightly more, let me qualify, just slightly more than the recommended dose, I can quickly go into acidosis. So yes, there are big pluses and minuses. I would tread on that much more cautiously than what I do in the non-ruminants.
Thank you, doctor. The next one coming to you again. Does Indian breed of cattle and buffalo too also need supplementation? Your thoughts?
Yeah, so in my presentation, I highlighted the amount of genetic progress that has been made. And therefore, that changing the nutritional requirement and forcing us to use more and more concentrated diets so that we pack all nutrients in a given volume the cow can eat. On the other extreme are very low productive animals. If you look at what we are feeding them, which is in most cases a very big quantity of straw, which contains very low nutrients to start with, and it is hard to even for the rumen microbes to digest. For example, paddy straw will stay easily for 38 to 42 hours in rumen. So anything which we can do to expedite this, any aid in changing the time taken in rumen to get fermented is going to help even to that cow. The problem is cost of doing this versus the reward. So the ROI of any such aid has to be justified with additional milk yield And there we have a limitation with the genetics. The extra milk you expect from the Indian cows may not be too high. Whereas buffaloes, I'll reserve my judgment. Buffaloes, we haven't done justice. We have 50% of world's buffalo population in our country. We have very good buffaloes. And if you just think about it, 3.84% milk fat in cow milk versus more than 8% in buffalo, a 10-liter buffalo easily translates to 20-liter cow. The nutrient it is giving us, and therefore the nutrient she needs to produce 1 liter of milk is entirely different. And the number of such buffaloes, fortunately, with some rudimentary selection being applied now, is going up. So I suppose there is a good scope even for the Indian breeds, whether they are cow or buffalo. We will have to justify whatever we do through the improved productivity we get.
Yeah. So Dr. Mahajan, the next one, in brief, can you explain the relation between insulin and ketosis?
Very interesting question. I put up a slide. In cows, number one, if you look at the glucose level in the cow's blood as against ours, normal range of 80 to 120 milligram per deciliter, the cows have just 40 to 60. So that shows us the importance of glucose for cows in our energy metabolism. It is much less. The cow uses volatile fatty acids, acetic acid, propionic acid as her source of energy. But still, she has a requirement for glucose. One, for our purpose, the lactose getting synthesized in mammary gland, the starting point is propionic acid and glucose. Propionic acid will get converted to glucose, and that has to be synthesized into lactose. Lactose synthesis decides the milk quantity. So it is that important. Now, unfortunately, it is tricky when it comes to studying the importance of insulin per se, and then again the insulin resistance which comes into play in case of ketotic cows. So scientists have clearly found a link between insulin sensitivity of a cow. Maybe she is secreting enough insulin, but her cells are not sensitive enough. They have developed a resistance, and that cow develops a problem in energy metabolism, which translates into ketosis. So maybe the insulin level is good, but sensitivity, the resistance is high, or the insulin level is low. That is the reason instead of talking of insulin level, the scientists, even on human side, they have developed an index, which is a easy formula of 1 divided by log of glucose concentration in blood plus log of insulin concentration in blood plus log of free fatty acids in blood. These three things are the important factors of energy metabolism, and ketosis is what? It is excess ketone bodies formed because of fat metabolism for energy purpose. So if you take care of the energy requirement by the cow, ensure there is less fat being metabolized for the energy which is required for good milk production, you will prevent ketosis. So yes, all this is a very recent research area, not older than maybe 10, 12 years. So we still have a lot to learn about. But as of now, insulin level in high yielding cows, the relation with body fat storage and utilization for energy metabolism is a subject under study. And more papers in dairy cow nutrition you'll find scientists studying NEFA as well as insulin levels.
Thank you, Dr. Mahajan. So now we move to Dr. Abhijit Mishra. So Dr. Mishra, first question on a very interesting question is, what do you think the prospects of applied research / contract research in poultry sector for assessments of the different feed additives?
See, definitely it has a great role, because if you look into the India or South Asian countries, we have a very limited reliable areas or the organizations or the setups where we can make the trials authentic. This is very good. Scopes is very much in a higher side, because if we can create it our own country, then definitely we should not have to go to the Thailand or the BARC to do the trials and all to validate that whether my product is working or not. So there are one or two setups are there in India, but we need more independent and authentic trial units.
So I pass on this, build upon what you said to Mr. Vijay Tang. So Vijay Tang, your thoughts, like how being an INFA president, how you see that INFA can drive the research and development spend or research and development investments into our sector. So compared to the other countries, relatively the research and development spend is relatively less here. So what INFA can do to stimulate the research and development in this sector?
Yeah, thanks to all the wonderful speakers. I think we have been engaging very constructively with various bodies across the country. INFA has been engaging with various research institutions, various scientific bodies, as well as the government bodies. Per se, our objective is to be a facilitator. We are going to be like a catalyst for undertaking research. So we are going to bring to the table that what is the need of the industry, what is the need of the customer, what is the need of a farmer, what he's looking forward to. So we are trying to bridge the gap between what the market or the patient or the farm owner needs and what is the actual research. Because we have realized a lot of research which is happening in our institutions is not going to go to the marketplace. So there is a lot of gap between what is being produced or research and what is actually being converted into a marketable product. So there is a huge gap. So we are trying to bridge that gap and trying to create platforms where we engage into and bridge this information and communication gap. And we are able to help the research institutions, the various scientific bodies to understand what actually the customer needs, what actually the farmer needs, what actually the industry needs. The second is engaging on transfer of technologies. That's another very important platform we are trying to create, wherein whatever good amount of research is being created is commercialized. So we have this industry platform. There is a very nice platform which has been created by Tanuvas. There is also a great platform created by IVRI, wherein the technologies are being showcased and they're being passed on to the industry. So there we are trying to become a catalyst and a promoter of those events. So this is the little bit of an facilitation we are trying to do on behalf of INFA.
Thank you, Mr. Vijay Tang. So, dear all participants, we really thank you for sparing your valuable time and joining this webinar. There are many more questions which are to be answered, but considering the paucity of time, so what we do, we have listed all those questions and we'll direct to Dr. Mahajan, Dr. Abhijit Mishra, and to respective managing committee members of INFA. And together with the presentations, what we have been seeing today, this will be uploaded on the INFA website, and the questions will be answered, and this document will be uploaded on INFA website. Also, Dr. Mahajan and Dr. Abhijit has been kindly, allowed us to, use those presentation to, upload for INFA members. So we promise you to put it there and share the links as well. And I want to say special thanks to Dr. PG Phalke for, giving the ideation of this webinar, and also, being a, you can say, guide for us to have a focus on the animal nutrition sector, because it contributes significantly, like say more than 2/3 to the entire economics of the value chain. So thank you, Dr. Phalke, once again, and I thank our President Vijay Tang, Mr. Satish Pasija, and all of my invited speaker, Dr. Mahajan, Abhijit Mishra ji, and Dr. Verma for collaboration for this event, and all the INFA managing committee members, all the members. Because of this, this event could be possible. So with this, I wish you a very good weekend ahead, and thank you so much. Stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you to everybody.
Thank you and bye bye.
Thank you and bye bye.